This is my talisman. So I had a request from a homie to do a video to talk about the 3, you know, because 9x3J, numerology, number system, correspondence, symbols, letters. I'm very like autistic, Asperger's with this shit. This chingadera. But number 3, because he was talking about you got to choose a side and polarities, and then he asked me, you know, I told him I represent the number 3. I represent the 3, which is basically the trifecta, which is basically the 3 is the tree, because it's the eternal watcher. It's the ancient spirit that's always ever present, that doesn't necessarily get pulled to the left or the right. It's rooted in whatever environment it's in. So to me, the 3 is a C, it's a seer. And you know, this is not something I just chose. It kind of chose me when I was named Corey. So the C is the 3. And why I went with the 3, there's a lot of like insect activity around me, because they say like the more light you shine, the more insects are attracted to it, as far as like, you know, the nature that you represent, or you know, they're trying to train us, you know what I mean, changing energy meridians and all that. But I think Phil Valentine said that. But you know, that shit always seems to like happen at certain times. There's like an ill correspondence with the trains and like the energies, the entities that implanted that and what they represent, as far as like usurping and negating, you know what I mean? Shout out to him. I'm not trying to swoop on that, but it just, you know, clearly you hear it. But the tree, the 3, instead of being polarized, you got the tree of life. You got, you know, you can zigzag between the 2 as far as the left-hand path, the right-hand path, which would be equivalent to like our super righteous, like no pork, no fornication, no alcohol, no curse words, no this. And then the left-hand path is like, give me your shit, nigga. You know what I mean? That's the left-hand path for, in all intents and purposes, as far as just like nefarious, clandestine, anything for the money. And you notice as you ascend that there's more external distractions to try to pull you off your square. That would be considered something to raise stress, based on, you know, what I've experienced in my life. And you notice that it happened right when I started the video. So it's like all these distractions, anything to try to stop you from getting out the true message, and that represents the chaos that tries to pull you in any direction, which would make me then reflect on something that would give me negative feelings, and then I would be off of my square. So you have to work on being balanced, which is what the 3 represents, is the balance. So you got Republicans, Democrats, Montagues, Capulets, men, women, and, you know, Bloods and Crips, you know, there's multiple ways it could go. Let's just go like Chicago Bulls and Denver Nuggets. 2 teams, that's polarities. In any given moment, that's polarities. One is the good guy, the home team. The other one's the villain, the away team. And you got the fans, and they're wearing their jerseys, so they chose a side. So they're against each other, and that makes them more volatile, because they're so like specifically governed in their actions and choices and decision making. So they're only able to do a certain amount of things within the given field. And if you have 2 polarities as far as dots, there's a line that's connecting them, but they can only kind of be in that linear thing, you know. You can switch sides or you can stay on your side. But the 3rd perspective is not necessarily on the line. It could be anywhere on the map outside of that line. So then let's say you got 2 dots and you got a dot right here, which is the 3rd, and you connect those, you get a pyramid, you get a triangle. and that's the capstone or the watcher, because it's not governed by those two decision matrices, as far as like you cheer or you boo, depending on what's happening, based on what you're told you have to align with or accept, or So then the third party would be who I represent, as far as the watcher, which is I'm sitting there and I'm a fan of the game. I'm not necessarily so, when AI was playing in the league, I was rooting for the Sixers, but I just love basketball. So I was observing it from that standpoint, which allows you to see a little bit more of what's actually happening, because you're not so blinded by the mobs that represent each, and you have to, oblige them. So you get a little bit more of a wisdom, because then you can see the patterns and it's not so limited. And I think a lot of this world is, from a child, they try to sting you into a polarity early, you know what I mean? Because it's like sometimes it's intentional. They sold you into slavery, or they're trying to pennywise you and feed on your stress energy. So if you're holding that polarity and you acknowledge that as your livelihood, then it's easier to kind of like push your buttons, because they know what to expect from you. But if you acknowledge the three, then you can see all angles and you're not so much easily swayed by it. And I think there's a light version and a shadow version of that. Because if you see like a man and a woman, we're supposed to be bickering with who's the supreme, who's the best, who's the most dominant, or who's the most suitable for leadership and all that. And they use that to govern us and provide products and activities for us to get our shits and giggles and our jollies. Men want to be conquerors, so we got guns and all this stuff, and vehicles and devices and machines and jobs that suit that realm, to where it's like I'm hyper masculine, I do this for a living, you know what I mean? And then women is like, well, I'm feminine and I want to be taken care of, and this. And so then there's demands that come with those polarities. And then we've had the advent of gender benders and transsexuals, and I think to a degree the transsexual agenda could be considered like a shadow agenda, because it's still kind of like, even though you could do your own thing, I think as a man and a woman you can embody the fluidity, and you don't have to necessarily chop off or fill up, you know what I mean, and invert or So it's not really too much that I just think it's like numerology plays a factor, and polarity is one of those things that just controls everything. And the more polarized you are on the spectrum, the more you probably have people aligned with you, but the less of the totality you're able to see in the matrix, or whatever the game theory, or whatever the circumstance is. And those people, I think, though they may be charismatic leaders and galvanize a large group of people, because you got to fit in. The lone wolves and the eagles, that fly above, those are the third, which is like nature, because it's eternal, it's ever present, but it's not necessarily thinking, it's not necessarily its worth is not determined by what it produces externally. It's more based on what it observes and internalizes internally, from being able to see both sides, and it serves as the bridge between the two. So that's a lot of like the mediators, and like a diplomat should be that, but a lot of times they're serving an agenda behind the scenes, which is like Republican, Democrat, or big banks. or like even green, it just depends. Even the Green Party, could be considered third, but a lot of times when money's involved, it polarizes you. So they have things, and they have you could say talismans, or you could say grimoires or gregors that force you to be polarized, because if in order to play that game, you have to demonstrate a polarity in any given moment. So if you're about something external, then it'll pull you or push you. And you know, we've made like stories, lore around that, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, you got the most money, you're the most like suitable for any given situation. But realistically, it's just like you super polarized yourself. And a lot of times those people don't have the most soul, which is everywhere. So you could be over here, and you know, a 3 could also lean over here and get some information, and then come over here and get some information, and then get back to the middle and purify it on the way up. So, you know, you got pillars, but it starts at the node. And the 3 is always going to be, I think, the most suitable for like communication between the two, the Scarlet Pimpernel or whoever's delivering the messenger, you know, the guardians, because the highest spiritual agenda, I believe, is like a guardianship overall, and you can't necessarily be as judgmental. I was talking to my cousin today about like church and how they be turning away, like, you know, she was talking about some women that came in off the street and they wanted to see what it was about, but everybody in there was like judging them because of what they were wearing and all that. So to me, it's like the church becomes polarized in that way. And I got two black cats outside right now. You know, so twos, a lot of things happen in twos. I think this reality is a binary reality, so it pushes you in that direction. But the third perspective is the spirit. Is that the third one in the distance? If that's the third one, you know what I'm talking about is legit. But I think it is. Hold on, I can't turn the camera around. I'll just wait. But yeah, I think the aim is to, in this reality, as far as like an evolutionary perspective, is to depolarize. And even though as a man, born a man with you know, male parts and urges, to find that balance to where I still have empathy for the feminine experience, i.e. finding the perspective to bridge the gap between the hemispheres, which requires visiting the women with earnestness and like open heart, and, you know, the desire to understand and become aware and gain that wisdom. And I think that's the highest form of a man. And then with a woman, which, because of fight or flight and Maslow, there's a lot more polarity that takes place there, like where it's more of a hive and it's more of a expectation, where you almost would get shamed by the populace if you don't align. Like, we're all on this type of time, girl, so you better get with this. I think the women that either have trauma or certain circumstances that take them out of that, and they're able to then connect their hemispheres, I think there's more benefit for them as well. And those are the higher evolved beings that walk amongst us, and those are people maybe behind the scenes that should be communicating on a council of some sort. Yeah, it's a cat. It's the third one, but that's the cat that's just chilling. The other two is on their mission, and the third one is just kicking back and kind of like looking at me, but far enough to where, you know. So think about that, the 2 cats walking this way, and then the third cat is like here. I put some water outside for him, but these are the cosmic correspondences that I feel like happen when you become the watcher instead of the, you know, fool rush in and just like, you know, the motherfucker at the top of the mountain that sees the whole battlefield and only acts when it's a wise decision, and like you consult cause and effect of both environments or circumstances, you know, through experience, through study. Um, and that's always been my story growing up. You know, two parents, I'm in the middle, first child, looking up at them like, okay, well, mom and dad, this is what's going on. At least until, you know, the divorce and all that. But the first formative 7 years, I was studying them. So I was the third in the family. So it's cyclical. It's all, you know, Fibonacci pi. They say the pi. Shout out to, I was just watching Pi last night. Phil Valentine was talking about the pi. 3.14, whatever it is, into infinitum, but it starts with the 3. So everything after that is like an update based on as the experiment continues. The point on the other side of the decimal point is like the information that the 3 is collecting as the multiples continue. That's just a theory that I, you know, came to me right now. But yeah, you know, the 3 is like Iverson, you know what I mean? It's like he was spiritual, but he was a goon, you know what I mean? So he was but he was with his mom. So his feminine was in line, and he, you know, of course they tried to like invert him by making him have like problems with his ladies and all that and whatever. But I think that's the truth, the highest truth of right now, as far as like an individual being 3-pronged instead of being polarized. So you got to do the things to bridge the gap. Some people use substances, some people just quest, because being around too much of your inception point, because there's so much inundation with polarities and polarizing, you know, marketing in order to get you to buy Pepsi or Coke. Nigga might fuck with root beer, but they ain't nothing in the vending machine, so you either got to get with the blood or the Crip. And they do that to basically eliminate your spirit, because you, in the choosing the polarity, you're abandoning that part of you that's like the seeker, and you just go with, okay, these are the rules, all right, fuck it, you know what I mean? Versus giving yourself that grace to be able to hold off on making the decision, and seeing that sometimes you don't even have to make a decision in any situation in order to progress and evolve. You just observe, you know what I mean? And I think that's when you get more gravity with your offerings, and you might have less exertion required, because it's like, I just learned from, you know, what the police officers do. I just watch them, how they move, and then I look at the dope dealers, because that's a polarity, you know what I mean? It's like hustlers, and then it's like institution. Or you could look at like businessmen and hustlers. Same kind of motivation, but different circumstances, and they're on the polarity. That might, you know, it just depending on the framework that you're going with. It could be cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, you know, Shiites and Sunni. But there's always a third, and a lot of times when you see polarities play out in the battlefield or the, you know, the environment, there's a third perspective on the shadow side that's governing that. That's like, well, we gave these motherfuckers guns or missiles, or we've been whispering in their ear to create this, and then we've been whispering in their ear. So that's the shadow side, the triangle upside down, which is more manipulation, which is why I feel like, you know, the feminine principle got to watch out for manipulation. And then the masculine side, if it's in that same upside down, got to watch out for like brutality, or just, you know, the lack of compassion, because they will play the war game out with two sides on some like chess shit just to get their agenda met. So that's a wicked 3. But then the high mind 3 is like, you know, you might just emote something that appeases both sides and like brings them to a greater understanding of each other. And those are the people that walk down the middle of the battlefield, kind of like, you know, the chick standing in front of the little girl in front of the tank with the flowers or something, or meditating, and, you know, the Dalai Lama or whoever it was setting himself on fire. These are the type of moments where it's like, I'm in the center. I know what y'all are about, but I'm like, you know, and that work I think is more of a stillness and like it has love to it. Because for some reason 3 just makes me think of green, even though it's like different chakra, you know, the chakra alignment. You got the red, the orange, the yellow. But I just associate 3 with green. Maybe it's because it's trees and nature and all that, or just natural essence. But yeah, so that's why I fuck with the 3, and it chose me, and I've never been able to be polarized. I've always been, if I was in a group of niggas and they was like, bitches ain't shit, or like, we gonna fuck these hoes, or it is what it is. Like, I might have tried to dance on that side, but I always ended up being like a cupcaker or like a sensitive thug, whatever, what have you. And the times when I was the most like reckless, it never lasted, or it was like I got punished more because I was supposed to be the 3. Like I always had that perspective of like, I'm in my own body, so I can't be anybody else. But it's always been like people around me that are just like pushing an agenda, and I was just kind of like pensive a little bit and fucking with the team, of course, but still being the balance on the team that might drop the ism or the Native American, the indigenous wisdom to keep us protected, or having the motivation to give us that non-basic motherfucker perspective. You know what I mean? Like, everybody wants to go this route. If we're gonna go in this arena and battle these motherfuckers, let's at least go from a higher mind perspective to where we're untouchable in the ways of like, I know what they would do to address us as a pole, and that would like, could shake you, because it's like if you're married to money, niggas could come at you and put you in a situation where they set you up. So it's like a spiritual hustler, you know what I mean? To where it's like we gonna base it on having a good night and making sure our night is the best, and the money comes along with it, and it's not like we end up in a gunfight, versus being the people who's like, nigga, if you disrespect me, nigga, I'm canceling your shit, or you know what I mean? If somebody disrespects you, you gotta take off on them. Like I always had that third perspective of like, well, if I do that, that could lead to this, could lead to this, could lead to this, then this. And that has, I feel like, protected me from situations where you bend but you don't break, or you get broken. So that whole thing about nigga be a man and all that, that's a polarizing mechanism. Or like, women being like, waste his time, that's a polarizing mechanism. We're not meeting in the middle. So meeting in the middle is always the best option. Always the best option. Because that's diplomacy, that's care, that's empathy, that's compassion, that's self-love and love for another. And if you look at the 3 and you kind of turn it on the side, you could complete the heart, you know what I mean? I mean, as it exists, and like, you know what I mean? Not the real look, but the one that the simulated heart. But yeah, that's how I rock. You know what I mean? I'll just be moving on that accord, and I feel like it's gotten me a long ways away from where I started, and it's protected me from falling by the wayside like many people I've been around. Because when you polarize, you feel like you got to perform, and that's where the fakeries come from, I feel like, as opposed to being in the middle, leaning, being flowy in the middle. Like, that's the S. You could be the Z too, you know what I mean? But those two, I feel like, would be the masculine, feminine versions of balance, but respect on, for both parties. You could be an I as well in the middle, but then you don't necessarily get to know the polarities, and you just kind of like a voyeur, which you learn, but you don't affect so much, you know what I mean? So you kind of gotta like study both in order to be as effective in this environment. So, nigga been to church and nigga had to work, you know what I mean? So, I think that in itself helped me to not marry either of them too much. And I believe in justice, but in a cosmic sense. So it's an elevated justice. It's not like a terrestrial justice, because that's like a polarized, I want to control everything, so I'm going to make these rules and enforce them with, dogmatic or, lies. But yeah, that's my perspective on that. I don't want to do too much, you know what I mean? But yeah, in these times we're going in right now, I think balancing that out, like, don't let the internet polarize you into being like, fuck niggas or fuck bitches or men ain't shit or women are all, whatever. The rhetoric. And the binary code of the algorithm is polarizing everybody intentionally, because the spirit is void on the internet and it's pulling us into it. So we have to abandon our spirit to participate a lot of times. And I think it's important to going forward, because there's going to be a lot of like breaking of, they'll break your structure down. They'll let you have a structure and then break it down on purpose, because then you don't have no like recovery. And in that time, then they can sweep you up into their agenda, because you're emotional without recourse or without perspective on, like, you're mad at him, but you don't know what he had to go through. You don't know who from the shadow third party, how they're manipulating both sides in order to keep you separate, so then they can make twice the money, versus y'all being together and y'all can make your own wealth as just loving each other and having like an abundant experience of sharing and like, talking through the bullshit, versus running to the polarity and being like, well, this just happened, fuck them. You know what I mean? That's always the easy route, but that's like the childish, not like the eternal child, but like the born on this earth can't fulfill its own needs child. And that only, because of this matrix, that's what it becomes. The externalized version of the spiritual experience is always more limited than the spiritual experience itself. So going internal is 9 times out of 10 the better option, and taking that time with yourself. And you got to think, you got to feel and intuit what the other side goes through before you can fully say you experienced this. Because if you write somebody off and you don't know that they're under like surveillance or like economic handicapping on purpose by the Shadow 3, then, you might miss out on the evolution of your spirit, and you'll just get some kudos from some other bitter people that's stiff and like stuck on the wall. But, we dancing, we boogieing in the middle, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's always served me the best. So I think I'm gonna end it there.